Chapter 8 continued. This is a real tongue twister of a chapter. Um, let's see how we get on. Art, Cubists and Kineticists. Art, like gesture, is a form of non-verbal expression and a prime channel for the transmission of images. Here the evidences of ephemeralization are, if anything, even more pronounced. If we regard each school of art as though it were a word-based language, we are witnessing the successive replacement not of words, but of whole languages at once. In the past, one rarely saw a fundamental change in an art style within a person's lifetime. A style of school endured, as a rule, for generations at a time. Today, the pace of turnover in art is vision blurring. The viewer scarcely has time to see a school develop, to learn its language, so to speak, before it vanishes. Bursting on the scene in the last quarter of the 19th century, Impressionism was only the first of a sequence of shattering changes. It came at a time when industrialism was beginning its climactic forward surge, bringing with it a notable step up in the tempo of everyday life. It is above all the furious speed of technological development and the way the pace is forced that seems pathological, particularly when compared with the rate of progress in earlier periods in the history of art and culture, writes the art historian Arnold Hauser in describing the turnover of art styles. For the rapid development of technology not only accelerates the change of fashion, but also the shifting emphases in the criteria of aesthetic taste. The continual and increasingly rapid replacement of old articles in everyday use by new ones readjusts the speed at which the philosophical and artistic revaluations occur. If we roughly date the Impressionist interval from 1875 to 1910, we see a period of dominance lasting approximately 35 years. Since then, no school or style, from Futurism to Fauvism, from Cubism to Surrealism, has dominated the scene for even that long. One after another, styles supplant one another. The most enduring 20th century school, Abstract Expressionism, held sway for at most 20 years, from 1940 to 60, then to be followed by a wild succession: Pop, lasting perhaps 5 years, Op, managing to grip the public's attention for 2 or 3 years, then the emergence, appropriately enough, of kinetic art, whose very raison d'être is transience. This phantasmagoric turnover is evident not merely in New York or San Francisco, but in Paris, in Rome, Stockholm and London, wherever painters are found. Thus, Robert Hughes writes in The New Society, "Hailing the new painters is now one of the annual sports in England. The enthusiasm for discovering a new direction in English art once a year has become a mania, a euphoric, almost hysterical belief in renewal. Indeed," he suggests, "the expectation that each year will bring a new mode and a new crop of artists is a significant parody of what is in itself a parochial situation, the accelerated turnover in the avant-garde today. If schools of art may be likened to languages, then individual works of art may be compared to words. If we make this transposition, we find in art a process exactly analogous to that now occurring in the verbal language. Here too, words, i.e. individual works of art, are coming into use and then dropping out of the vocabulary at heightened speeds. Individual works flash across our consciousness in galleries or in the pages of mass magazines. The next time we look, they are gone. Sometimes the work itself quite literally disappears. Many are collages or constructions built of fragile materials that simply fall apart after a short time. Much of the confusion in the art world today arises from the failure of the cultural establishment to recognise once and for all that elitism and permanence are dead. So at least contends John McHale, the imaginative Scot, half artist, half social scientist, who heads the Centre for Integrative Studies, State University of New York, at Binghamton. In a forceful essay entitled The Plastic Parthenon, McHale points out that traditional canons of literary and artistic judgment tend to place high value on permanence, uniqueness, and the enduring universal value of chosen artefacts. Such aesthetic standards, he argues, were appropriate enough in a world of handcrafted goods and relatively small taste-making elites. These same standards, however, in no way enable one to relate adequately to our present situation, in which astronomical numbers of artefacts are mass-produced, circulated, and consumed. These may be identical in only marginally different. In varying degree, they are expendable, replaceable, and lack any unique value or intrinsic truth. Today's artists, McHale suggests, neither work for a tiny elite nor take seriously the idea that permanence is a virtue. The future of art, he says, seems no longer to lie with the creation of enduring masterworks. Rather, artists work for the short term. McHale concludes that accelerated changes in the human condition require an array of symbolic images of man which will match up to the requirements of constant change, fleeting impression, and a high rate of obsolescence. We need, he says, a replaceable, expendable series of icons. One may quarrel with McHale's contention that transience in art is desirable. Perhaps the flight from permanence is a tactical error. It can even be argued that our artists are employing homeopathic magic, behaving like primitives who, awed by a force they do not comprehend, attempt to exert control over it by simple-mindedly imitating it. But whatever one's attitude towards contemporary art, transience remains an implacable fact, a social and historic tendency so central in our times that it cannot be ignored, and it is clear that artists are reacting to it. The impulse towards transience in art explains the whole development of that more transient of artworks, the happening. Alan Caprow, Kaprow, not sure how to pronounce that, who is often credited with originating the throwaway culture. Who is often credited with originating the happening. And by the way, the happening is in inverted commas. The happening has explicitly suggested its relationship to the throwaway culture within which we live. The happening, according to its proponents, is ideally performed once and once only. The happening is the Kleenex tissue of art. This so, kinetic art can be considered the aesthetic embodiment of modularism. Kinetic sculptures or constructions crawl, whistle, whine, swing, twitch, rock or pulsate, their lights blinking, their magnetic tapes whirling, their plastic, steel, glass and copper components arranging and rearranging themselves into evanescent patterns within a given, though sometimes concealed, framework. Here, the wiring and connections tend to be the least transient part of the structure, just as the gantry cranes and service towers in Joan Littlewood's Fun Palace are designed to outlive any particular arrangement of the modular components. The intent of the kinetic work, however, is to create maximum variability and maximum transience. Jean Clay has pointed out that in a traditional work of art, the relationship of parts to a whole had been decided forever. In kinetic art, he says, the balance of forms is in flux. Presumably that his name is Jean Clay, not Jean. Sorry about that. Didn't realise it was a he till I turned the page. Back to the book. Many artists are working with engineers and scientists today in the hope of exploiting the latest technical processes for their own purposes, the symbolisation of the accelerative thrust in society. Speed, writes Fran Castel, the French art critic, has something undreamt of and constant movement every man's intimate experience. Not sure. Let me read that sentence again. Speed has become something undreamt of and constant movement every man's intimate experience. Art reflects this new reality. Thus we find artists from France, England, the US, Scotland, Sweden, Israel and elsewhere creating kinetic images. Their creed is perhaps best expressed by Yaakov Agam, an Israeli kineticist, who says, "We are different from what we were 3 moments ago, and in 3 minutes more we will again be different. I try to give this approach a plastic expression by creating a visual form that doesn't exist. The image appears and disappears, but nothing is retained." The final culmination of such efforts, of course, is the creation of those new and quite real fun palaces, so-called total environment nightclubs, in which the fun seeker plunges into a space in which lights, colours and sounds change their patterns constantly. In effect, the patron steps inside a work of kinetic art. Here again, the framework, the building itself, is only the longest lasting part of the whole, while its interior is designed to produce transient combinations of sensory inputs. Whether one regards this as fun or not depends on the individual, perhaps, but the overall direction of such movements is clear. In art, as in language, we are racing towards impermanence. People's relationships with symbolic imagery are growing more and more temporary.